So if you've had the privilege and the opportunity to lead, whether it's in the military in some other domain, recognize that asset, recognize that privilege, and make the most of it.
As brothers in arms on the ground and in the air over Afghanistan with the Marines, to moving forward in the Silicon Valley with Google and Facebook. Leading from the front has always been a family affair for the Faul brothers. Now, as a tech entrepreneur, Don Faul is helping other veterans make the transition from warfighting to technology, like he did at Google, Facebook, and Pinterest. His younger brother, Adam Faul, is doing the same at Instagram by adapting the leadership skills they both learned in the military to the much different world of technology. As part of the Marines Memorial Association's tradition of honoring commitment and sharing timeless leadership lessons learned in all walks of life, the conversation continues in this online extension of what normally takes place at the Marines Memorial Club, a public, nonprofit hotel, theater, restaurant, and event space in downtown San Francisco, serving generations past and generations to come for nearly 75 years and counting. I'm Correspondent Mike Cerre, and this is Leading from the Front. The personal opinions expressed here are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of the Marines Memorial Club. Don and Adam Faul, welcome, and thank you for joining us here at the Marines Memorial Club, albeit virtually. But how do you like my room here? One of the executive suites.
Got the upgrade there.
Yeah.
That looks like a five-star hotel.
I've never been in this room before. General Hewley doesn't let me up here very often, so but this is a very special occasion, and I promised him we'd clean it up after we finish with it. But thank you for letting us continue the conversation on leadership. And it was interesting in talking with you both previously that when you reflect back on where you got your leadership inspiration, both of you said it was your parents. Don?
Yes, yeah. Adam and I and our brother Ryan, incredibly fortunate, to grow up in a house with two incredible examples who taught us a lot about leadership. Our father, who I think from whom we learned the importance of discipline and hard work and taking care of others. From our mother, learned empathy and compassion, selflessness, serving others. On both fronts, I think our earliest leadership lessons came directly from our parents.
And neither of them, as I understood, were in the military, but each brought a certain quality and element that was certainly indelible in your mind, Adam.
For sure. And my dad often brags he was in the Eagle Scouts. I thought in itself brought some and instilled some leadership traits with regards to, what Don was referring to, the kind of servant leadership. One thing that our parents always did was put others first, very much to include us. And that's something, as we've now started families of our own, have fully understand the sacrifices they made to ensure that we were supported as much as possible, and that they always set the right example. I think that's the part I see a lot now, is when you're stretched to the limits, like what's going on in COVID right now, and you get tired, having the moral courage to do the right thing consistently in front of those that you need to lead or parent is incredibly difficult. So it was something that was, I think, is incredibly important for us growing up.
What other sources of inspiration did you have for leadership as you were growing up? Would it be a teacher? Would it be a coach? Anything in that regard?
It was interesting. One of the earliest kind of memories I have of looking up to someone other than my parents and family members was sixth grade soccer coach and history coach who was an Army veteran, Mr. Goodman. I think, Don, you may have even had him.
I do.
And I remember distinctly once we were at practice, and one of the players was struggling, and like you do in school, folks were kind of laughing at it and kind of poking and making fun of him. And he stopped everything, came over, and explicitly was like, it's important that instead of laughing at him, you go over there and help him, right? You like, I expect you and your brother to be leaders here on this team and to do the right thing, which is to go over and help that teammate, right? And the team is only as strong as its weakest link. And it was important that you always bring those around you with you and if people need help, that you offer it.
And Don, playing athletics at Annapolis, that probably made you learn some real leadership skills.
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I played rugby in college, and learned a ton about leadership on the rugby field. Adam and I both played rugby, actually, and I think in that environment, learning what it means to be a great teammate as an underclass, learning how to support and serve others, really understanding what your role is in supporting the success of a group of folks, learning how to deal with adversity, the importance of hard work and discipline. And then for me as a senior in more of an explicit leadership role in the team, learning how to lead my peers, and learning through influence and mutual respect and listening.
So you both end up in the Marine Corps, which I imagine accelerated your leadership training to warp speed. When you first went into the Marine Corps, what was the takeaway that you had about how they viewed leadership?
For me, it's funny. I showed up at the Naval Academy not knowing anything about the military. As Adam had mentioned, we didn't come from having a lot of military in our family, but showed up there thinking I wanted to be a pilot, actually, a Navy pilot or a Navy backseater, because I didn't have good vision. And my first experience with the Marine Corps was down in Quantico after my sophomore year. And I came back from that 4 weeks with total clarity that the Marine Corps was the right service for me. And it was all about the Marine Corps' kind of unique culture around leadership, around putting Marines first, the little things like Marines eating first and leaders eating last. Little things like sleeping on the deck right next to your Marines, like taking a turn on fire watch with the rest of your Marines. That really, really resonated with me. So I was hooked at that point and learned an enormous amount, without question, during my time in the Marine Corps about leadership and how to really be what it meant to be a servant leader, what it meant to support others and put Marines first.
As a junior officer going into Afghanistan with very little experience, how did you pick up on the leadership skills you needed to keep your group going?
I think for me, I was so incredibly lucky to have an incredible group of Marines and people around me. I had a platoon sergeant, a guy named Roy Chalmers. He was a staff sergeant, had gone to Ranger School, had been in the light armored reconnaissance community for a while. Gosh, he taught me so much about leadership. Really showed to me how it's really the team and the people that are part of an organization that make leaders look good. And he certainly did that for me. And I drew on the kind of courage and conviction of my Marines. And when we got on the ground in Afghanistan, in the moments where it required us coming together, it was just really incredible to see how, a bunch of young Marines, 19, 20, 21 years old, could really come together and do amazing things in spite of all of the uncertainty. Not a single one of us had ever been in a real situation like that before, yet people really came together and drew on kind of strength from each other. So I all of that to, the Marines who I was really fortunate to serve with.
Adam, you followed a few years later into Afghanistan, had your own experiences there, and as a Harrier pilot and being part of a squadron, your squadron suffered a very serious attack in Afghanistan with many casualties, including the commanding officer. Trying to reinstill confidence and leadership in that group afterwards, was that one of your biggest challenges?
It was. One, not being there with your peers that you served with, that you were over there for weeks. And for context, the day prior to the attack, we had flown 2 airplanes. I flew one of them out to Qatar, to Al Udeid Air Base, and having to see it and watch it roll out or watch it occur, and not being able to do anything about it was incredibly frustrating. And then afterwards, not being able to go back to serve with your peers, to really get back in the fight because we had other obligations.
You talked about one of the biggest challenges was trying to bring 2 different cultures together, guys who had been there during the attack and the new guys who were joining the unit, and now trying to make them one whole unit. What did you learn about lessons in leadership there that apply to kind of unifying a group that was very divided between two different cultures?
Well, I didn't see it coming. I think a lot of people didn't realize what was the challenge until it showed up. And distinctly, we had groups of, like, you would look out in the hangar bay and there'd be a group of folks that went through the attack and a group that didn't. And right away, our interim CEO came in, Lieutenant Colonel Pearson, recognized it and he called it out. He said, "Hey, we're not going to have two squadrons here. There wasn't the squadron that was in attack, and there wasn't the squadron that was RBE, who's back in Yuma. It's one squadron. We have one mission, and I don't want to see, I don't want to see cliques. I don't want to see different groups. I don't want to see favoritism. And I think addressing it directly and bluntly is something that I picked up on right away. Was he called it out. He didn't let it stew. He didn't let passive aggressive comments be made. He just directly said, "Hey, this is a problem. We need to address it." And then I think one of the things he did that was brilliant was he just set a cadence. He set a routine. He's like, "This is how we're going to execute for the foreseeable future." Very predictable. Everyone knew what they were accountable for. Everyone had a purpose.
I believe that leadership is universal. Whether you learn how to lead in the military, in government, in education, those principles, skills, and experiences are relevant in any context where people need to be led.
Both of you in your professional careers going into technology, if there ever was a time and a place to try to bridge two different cultures, bridging your Marine culture to the technology culture, how difficult was that, Don?
It was certainly an adjustment, no question. I remember my first experience, in technology world was a few months after I got out of the Marine Corps and started graduate school up here, and I went to interview for my first internship at Google. And went over to the campus, and as you can imagine, I'm not sure there's a more different environment than the Marine Corps and what I was used to than the Google campus. It felt like I had stumbled into a carnival. And so I showed up there for my interview in a suit with a tie, and the guy interviewing me laughed at me and said, "Take that ridiculous tie off and jackets." That's kind of started my experience with technology. Without question, very different environment. It took an adjustment for me. But what I found over time actually was that while there was a lot that was different, at first blush, it felt like everything was different. The way that people talked, the environments, the lingo. But when it came down to leadership, actually what I found was so much was actually the same. That, people are people, and what they want from their leaders and the role of their leaders and what makes for great leaders actually came back to a lot of the principles and values that we learned in the Marine Corps, albeit with a learning curve for me in the language that I used, dialing back the 4-letter words a little bit, and better understanding some of the more specific domain contexts of working in this new environment.
And Adam, as a new guy in technology yourself, I mean, the Marine Corps often would thrust you into a situation where you didn't have much experience or run up to. Were you feeling that the same way when you got thrown in the technology world? I believe you started with Facebook.
I did. And I started in intellectual property, which I Googled about 30 minutes prior to the interview to figure out what that was. And I was fortunate that they were building an escalations team, which essentially turned out to be just a crisis response ODO, like a duty officer job. Just be available for questions or emergencies that pop up 24/7. And I think that's just 101 for any officer in the Marine Corps. Is like, hey, what's the duty schedule? What are the responsibilities of the duty when they're on it? So fortunately, I did fall into some things that resonated very quickly. But to Don's point, luckily Don was kind of coaching me through this. He was like, hey, here's some expectations. The added bonus was I tell people I had 11 years of untapped empathy that I bring to the front as I was leading individuals at Facebook. But to Don's point, some of the things that popped up right away was there were a lot of managers. There weren't many leaders in the organization. There weren't people who would step in and make a decision in ambiguity or with very little information. There weren't leaders that would step in front of their folks when stuff was coming top down, or they were getting in trouble or they messed something up. They would just kind of sit there and let it kind of really impact the employee more than it should and not take responsibility. So I think very quickly, just naturally, coming in, those traits come out. However, peer leadership was an adjustment for me in technology, was learning how to work with peers who are not on the same incentive program that you are, or the same career track, or really have the same outlook on the mission as you do.
I think my impression when I first transitioned, when it was more towards the other end of the spectrum, where actually there was an expectation that everyone have context around every decision and has input into it. And that was just fundamentally very new for me. And so I was used to saying, okay, great, here's the information, let's go. And found that there were members of my team who were like, wait a second, why are we doing this?
The Marine Corps is not that democratic when it gets down to making decisions.
That's right. That's right. And it's not that democratic, and there's the entire culture is built around that. There's an expectation. And so actually I found that at times, if it's too democratic, Marines start to get uncomfortable. They're like, hey, wait a second, like make a call here so we can move. So I had to learn in this new environment, how do you build consensus? How do you share context, but also preserve the decisiveness you move? I think in the military context, some leaders can lean on the hierarchy to be directive and dictatorial and not solicit input where it's really valuable. I think in the private sector, you get the opposite, where you can tend towards consensus and round and a lack of decisiveness and no progress. And so I had to learn, how to strike the right balance in the middle. And I think, as Adam touched on, in this environment, being able to bring people along to make sure they understand really what we would articulate in the Marine Corps, understand the commander's intent, understand the context around the situation, and then make a decision so that people can get going and people can move and help people understand why that level of decisiveness is really important for the team and the organization.
Given the different culture, different vernacular, how did you guys learn how to communicate what you needed to communicate?
That was definitely an adjustment. I remember one of the more embarrassing stories was one of my first employees I hired. In fact, the first one I hired on my second day, my first ever interview, and my manager at the time just said, "What do you think?" I was like, "Hey, seems like a nice guy." I had never interviewed or hired anyone in my entire life, but it turned out to be an amazing hire. About 6 months later, he's like, "It's really nice you're not calling us civilians anymore." That was incredibly embarrassing, but I would tell them often they weren't too bad for being a bunch of civilians, not realizing I was a civilian myself. The sharpness of your language you had to be very aware of. You could be direct, but you had to understand everyone in the room and read the room, and everyone had different touch points. Like everyone would be set off by a different approach. And to Don's point, like setting the conditions for change was incredibly important until you earn the trust of everyone in the room, where you could just be yourself and say, "Yeah, I think we should just do this." And they're like, "Okay, Adam's been right most of the time," or like he has good intent. It's for the team or the company, or for the company or the team. But it just firing off an opinion in a room, if you haven't set conditions for change or you don't fully understand the folks in the room, will very quickly put that opinion or decision to the back. Like people just exclude it on principle. So that was tough to figure out. And Don helped me coach me through some of that early on, which was like, hey, there's a lot of people spinning on short-term things. Let them spin on that. Don't get wrapped up in their approach or their problems with this issue you're trying to solve. Just keep focusing on solving it for the company. And in the long run, it will work out. And that turned out to be some incredibly important advice that I still give out today.
Don, I read something that you wrote in Fast Company about storytelling, the essence of taking what you had to communicate and distilling it down into a story that people could comprehend.
Yeah, that's a skill I learned, really started to learn during my time in the Marine Corps. I had the opportunity to serve with and under General Mattis, who is one of the most incredible, inspiring storytellers, probably the most inspired storyteller leader that I've ever had the privilege of working with. And, that was something that I had to learn and had to get really good at and have in my leadership toolkit. When I think about what makes General Mattis so great at it, and a lot of what I've tried to kind of model my approach around, it starts with understanding your people. Where are they? What's in their head? What are they concerned about? What are they afraid of? I remember General Mattis gave a a speech gathering Marines around in Kandahar at the airport. We had just gotten into Afghanistan, a lot of anxiety and nervousness, and General Mattis called all the Marines around and gave a speech, but really told the story. And starting by understanding that Marines were nervous, Marines were anxious, they didn't know what was coming.
And one of the things that I love doing is taking a look at how people are using Pinterest.
And so starting with understanding where your people are, what their concerns are, and then being able to weave together a story and a narrative that inspires them, that speaks to them, where they feel like you really deeply understand them and care about them. And so I think that's the skill set that for me has been a really important one to develop and invest in, that I use all the time. You know, and I work at a really small startup now. Startups most of them fail. Everyone, even those that succeed, end up going through a lot of really challenging times. And so I've had to really lean on, you know, my ability to get the team, get the company through some, you know, moments of uncertainty and anxiety and fear about whether we're going to make it and how we pull together. And so I think that skill set around learning how to incorporate stories and tell stories as part of your leadership toolkit is a really important one.
You know, one of the motivations for doing this Leading from the Front series was we all feel that there are many new challenges we're all facing, many new leadership challenges in all walks of American life and professions. And I'm wondering, for both of you guys being in technology, do you think technology will be able to lead us through some of the problems and crises we have now?
You know, I think at the end of the day, technology is a tool and can be a really powerful one. And, you know, when I think about what carries people, teams, organizations, society through really hard times, it's not tools, it's people. It's leaders. It's leaders with character. It's leaders with courage who are able to, in Adam's example, bring that squadron that was at risk of dividing together. That was great leadership that made that happen. And I think technology can be an incredibly powerful tool to communicate, to share information, to bring people together. But what we really need in this country right now is leadership who puts the country first, who cares about people, who checks their own ego at the door, and leadership who's willing to use these tools to kind of achieve that goal of healing, of bringing people together, of getting this country back to what we do best, which is putting the country first and putting each other first as one country. We need that leadership.
Adam, what do you consider to be the greatest crisis of leadership right now? What on how decisions are being made?
As Don mentioned, I think it's integrity. I think that's the forefront right now. One of the, I guess, the pluses or minuses of technology right now is that everything is shared almost instantly. So accountability now has never been more apparent when it comes to our leaders across the board, whether it's a small company or a head of state. Is that there's, you know, everything is watched now. And this is something that was honestly instilled to us in the Marine Corps from the get-go. I just remember one of my first days in OCS where they're just like, hey, Marines watch every single thing you do at all times. They're always looking for you to make the right decision. And I think as leaders during challenging times, you have to be incredibly unselfish and make the right decision. That may not be the popular decision, but it's the right decision for whether it's your small company or state or large company. That's what's lacking, is that accountability and integrity.
So let's bring the Faul Family Leadership School full circle. And I'll ask each of you, Adam, what'd you learn from Don?
A ton. Don has always been obviously a role model. It was an unfair advantage for my twin brother and I, Ryan, to have Don as an older brother and really set the example. He set the bar a little bit too high, but it's been amazing to watch him kind of navigate his personal and professional life. When Don enters something, he looks for the greatest challenge and goes after it. That's something that my brother and I have also tried to emulate, and through our military career, it's led to, and careers in general, it's led to success, because you really don't understand what you're capable of unless you take on the biggest challenge, and you do it consistently, and you do it with vigor. So I think the one thing I definitely learned from Don was, find the hardest thing that there is, and go and try and do it.
And Don, what have you learned from your younger brother?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think, for myself, our other brother, Ryan, our parents, we realized quickly Adam's the smartest one when he decided to go aviation after seeing Ryan and I go the infantry route. So that was clear from the get-go. I think being oldest really just affords you one thing, which is you have the opportunity to make mistakes before the rest of folks. Adam is such a uniquely authentic leader. I think the core of great leadership, one of the cores of great leadership is authenticity. And sometimes I think, particularly when you're a new leader or you're in new challenging circumstances, you feel pulled to try to be this version of the leader that you think people want to see. And Adam I've been always just so impressed with. He is just such an authentic servant leader who cares about others, whose leadership style is really natural. It's natural since he was young. I could see him with his friends, with the teammates that he played with. And that was the core of what made him a great leader in the Marine Corps and what has made him a great leader at Facebook and will continue to make him a great leader. I always felt like I had to force it a little bit more. That authenticity took time for me to kind of learn and get comfortable with. And so that's something where Adam has really inspired me.
Don, Adam, thank you for helping us continue this conversation on leadership here at the Marines Memorial Club, which is largely closed due to the pandemic. At least the theater is closed where we would normally have these lectures and conversations, but the hotel is open. And we welcome you to come back as soon as possible. And we'll make sure we clean up the room here before we leave. Thanks again, Don and Adam.
Thanks so much for having us, Mike. Really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it, Mike.
Semper Fi. For more information on leading from the front and how you can support it and the Marines Memorial Association with your tax-deductible contribution during this challenging time, go to ourmission.marinesmemorial.org/lead.